The day was a living thing, breathing against my skin with the damp heaviness of rain lingering on the pavement. Streetlights hummed above, their glow fractured by mist, casting halos that blurred the edges of the world. My hood was up, hands buried in the deep pockets of a weathered jacket, and I walked with the quiet rhythm of someone who had long ago learned to move unnoticed. It wasn't a neighborhood I knew well, but one I'd been in often enough lately, too often. That's the curse of undercover work. You spend so long playing the part of someone else that even your reflection stops recognizing you. My beard was thick, rough around the edges. My sneakers were worn down, soles threatening to peel. The hoodie, the loose jeans, the tired gait, they weren't costumes anymore. They had become me, or at least the me that the streets believed I was. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement behind a lace curtain. A shadow stiffened, then disappeared. I didn't need to see the face to know what was happening. The unease, the suspicion, the instinct to watch, to measure, to judge. My pace stayed steady, heart calm, eyes forward, but I could feel the weight of being watched. Then came the sound, the sharp creak of a porch door swinging open, a woman's voice cutting across the damp air like a snapped branch. "Hey, you, what are you doing out here?" I didn't turn immediately. Years of training had taught me not to flinch at sudden confrontation, but her tone was not curious. It was accusatory, tight with the kind of fear that comes wrapped in hostility. Slowly, I lifted my head just enough to see her standing under the porch light. A white woman, early 40s maybe, blonde hair tied back, clutching her cell phone like it was both shield and weapon. Her eyes locked on me with the sharp focus of someone already convinced they were in danger. "I'm calling 911, she announced, voice trembling but loud enough to carry. A ripple of silence followed, and for a fraction of a second I wanted to explain. To tell her I wasn't what she thought I was. To break cover, reveal the badge tucked inside the jacket. But every fiber of discipline screamed against it. You don't break character. You don't compromise the work. So I said nothing. The silence must have unnerved her more because within moments, she raised the phone to her ear. Her words, quick, clipped, floated down the street. "Yes, there's a man. He's loitering. Looks dangerous. Send someone quickly." Sirens tore through the quiet day faster than I expected. Too fast. I realized then she lived close to a precinct. Within minutes, red and blue lights washed over the street, splashing me in the colors of guilt. And that's when it happened, when the same men I worked beside almost every day stormed out of their cruisers, weapons half drawn, eyes narrowed at the silhouette of a black man in a hoodie. And none of them recognized me. The crackle of radios filled the day, a harsh chorus layered over the wet hiss of tires rolling across the slick street. 3 squad cars had boxed me in before I could even take a step. Their headlights flooded the pavement, slicing away any shadows I might have used for cover. "Hands where we can see them." The command came sharp, practiced, rehearsed 1,000 times in training. Only today I wasn't standing with the officers, I was standing on the receiving end. My chest tightened, a sharp reminder of how fragile the line between authority and target could be. I raised my hands slowly, deliberately, palms open to the sky. My heart thudded against my ribs, but my face remained still, expression unreadable. Years of undercover work had trained me for silence, for masks. But this mask was different. This one wasn't a role, it was survival. "Don't move," another officer barked. His weapon hadn't left its holster, but his hand rested on it like a reflex, the kind of reflex that ended lives in a blink. From the corner of my vision, I saw her, Melissa. She stood on her porch, arms folded tightly, chin lifted as if she had summoned justice itself to her doorstep. Her face was pale, eyes wide, but not with fear anymore, with certainty. She believed she had done something righteous, called in danger, protected her world. The irony twisted inside me like a knife. One of the younger officers approached, his flashlight blinding me. "What are you doing out here? You live around here?" His tone wasn't really asking, it was interrogating, demanding an explanation I couldn't give without blowing months of deep work. I said nothing, just the measured breaths of a man cornered, but refusing to panic. That silence unsettled him. He swung the light closer, checking my face, my clothes. "Turn around, hands on your head." I obeyed, every movement slow, deliberate. The cuffs clicked around my wrists, the cold bite of steel both familiar and infuriating. I'd placed these same cuffs on men who had done terrible things. Now they wrapped around me like accusation, like betrayal. "Suspicious activity," the officer muttered into his radio, as though that alone justified the entire scene. Melissa's voice floated down again. "I told you he was up to something, just standing there watching houses. Who does that?" Her words dug into me, but not because they were cruel, because they were careless. She didn't see me. She saw only her fears, her biases, painted onto the canvas of my skin. I wanted to shout, to tell them all who I really was, to tear open my jacket, show them the badge, watch the recognition dawn, and their faces crumble. But breaking cover wasn't that simple. The case I was working had been building for months, an intricate web of surveillance, false identities, carefully planted trust. One slip, one moment of truth too early, and everything collapsed. So I swallowed it down. The drive to the station was a blur of flashing lights and distorted reflections in rain-speckled windows. Melissa's house disappeared behind us, but the echo of her certainty stayed lodged in my chest. Inside the precinct, the familiar walls suddenly felt foreign. I had walked these halls countless times, but never with my wrists bound. Officers nodded, some curious, some dismissive. To them, I was just another man brought in on suspicion, another name for paperwork. They placed me in an interrogation room. Gray walls, one table, two chairs, a single camera eye in the corner. I had been on the other side of that lens too many times to count, but today I sat beneath it, silent, waiting. Minutes bled into an hour, no one came. I was being processed like any other suspect, and part of me wondered if that was intentional, if they were testing me, or if bureaucracy had simply swallowed me whole. Finally, the door opened. Detective Rourke stepped in, older, sharp-eyed, the kind of man whose instincts had carried him through decades of police work. He set a file on the table, flipped it open, and studied me for a long moment without speaking. "You're quiet," he finally said. His voice was low, steady. "Most guys in your position can't stop talking, begging, explaining. You haven't said a word." I met his eyes, kept my own voice measured. Sometimes silence tells you more than noise. Something flickered across his face. Not recognition yet, but curiosity. He leaned forward. "Melissa, neighbor on Maple Street, called you in, said you looked dangerous, said you were lurking. Why were you there?" The answer perched on my tongue, heavy, dangerous. I could tell him the truth, end this charade with a single sentence. But that truth had chains attached to it, chains that could drag an entire case down with me. So I chose the path I'd been trained for. The mask, the role. "I was walking," I said flatly. His eyes narrowed. "At that hour? In that neighborhood? You expect me to believe you were just walking?" I let silence answer him. He studied me a moment longer, then sighed. "All right, we'll hold you over day. Maybe tomorrow you'll feel like explaining." The door shut behind him. The click of the lock echoed. Alone again, I leaned back against the cold chair, the weight of dual lives pressing down. To Melissa, I was a threat. To the officers, I was a suspect. And to myself, I was a man balancing on the razor-thin line between duty and identity. Somewhere outside, the city pulsed on. Sirens, laughter, broken bottles, lullabies whispered behind locked doors. And I sat in silence, cuffed, caught, unseen for who I truly was. But deep down, I knew the truth always had a way of clawing its way into the light. The metal chair beneath me felt like an anchor, cold against my back, pressing me deeper into the weight of my own restraint. Hours passed. The fluorescent light hummed overhead like a cruel reminder of time refusing to move. My wrists burned where the cuffs dug into skin, and though I had endured worse in the line of duty, something about this humiliation gnawed deeper. Not the steel, not the silence, but the fact that Melissa's voice still echoed in my head. He looked dangerous. I knew he was trouble. Her certainty was heavier than the chains. I'd seen this pattern before. Innocent men, women, kids swallowed by suspicion, chewed by bias, and spat into a system that marked them forever. I had sworn to fight it from the inside, to take my badge into the cracks of society where justice rarely reached. Yet here I sat, branded by the very shadow I had been fighting against. The door opened again. Not Detective Rourke this time. A younger officer, nervous, shoulders too stiff, slid in carrying a styrofoam cup of coffee. He placed it on the table without meeting my eyes. "Thought you might need this." His voice was barely above a whisper. I looked at the cup, then at him. "You think suspects get coffee now?" He hesitated. His Adam's apple bobbed. "You don't look like the others." That phrase, I'd heard it too many times in too many ways. Not like the others, always meant to comfort, but it burned all the same. "What do the others look like?" I asked, my tone sharp enough to cut the quiet. He froze, searching for words he couldn't shape. Finally, he muttered something about paperwork and fled, leaving the cup steaming between us like a fragile truce. I didn't touch it. Minutes later, the intercom crackled. "Bring him to holding." The hallway stretched long, sterile. Each step echoed, the cuffs rattling with every movement. Officers glanced at me, some curious, some indifferent, a few with that edge of judgment in their eyes. They saw a suspect, not a brother, not one of them. They placed me in a crowded cell. Faces turned, some men slouched against the wall, others sat hunched over their knees. All carried the same air of exhaustion, of being worn down by a system too heavy to fight. One man, broad shoulders, tattoos inked like maps across his arms, leaned forward. "What they got you for?" I met his gaze evenly. "Walking." The cell broke into laughter, the kind of bitter laughter that had no humor left in it. "Yeah," another muttered. "That'll do it. Walking while breathing." They didn't know who I was. They didn't know I had once put men like them in these same cells. And yet, in that moment, the line blurred. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking down from the other side of the bars. I was shoulder to shoulder with them. That day stretched long. Sleep never came. I kept running scenarios in my mind. What Melissa was telling herself, what the officers were writing in reports, what the case I'd been building was unraveling into outside these walls. My cover was fragile, but my silence was necessary. Every instinct screamed to reveal the badge, to shatter this farce. But justice demanded patience. By morning, I was pulled back into the interrogation room. Detective Rourke sat waiting, his expression unreadable. A fresh file lay on the table. My file. He tapped the folder. "You've got no record, no priors, not even a parking ticket. That's interesting." I said nothing. "You're too calm," he pressed. "Most innocent men shout their lungs out. Most guilty men beg or lie. But you sit quiet, which makes me think you're hiding something else, something bigger." His words sliced close to the truth, too close. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "So what is it? You working with someone? You running something on the side? Because I'll tell you this, Melissa may not have had the whole picture, but something about you doesn't fit." I met his eyes, steady. "Ever think maybe the picture's too small?" His jaw tightened. For the first time, he looked unsettled. The interrogation dragged on for hours. Questions layered over questions, but I gave nothing away. Every word I didn't speak was a sacrifice. Every silence a thread holding the case intact. By evening, frustration lined Rourke's face. He finally stood, gathering his papers. "Fine. You'll sit another day. Maybe tomorrow you'll remember your story." The door closed. And I knew then I couldn't let another day slip by. The operation outside was too important. Too many lives depended on the case I had built. But fate has a way of forcing hands, because just as I settled into the weight of another day, the station doors burst open. Raised voices, heavy boots pounding against tile. The atmosphere shifted like a storm sweeping in. And then I heard it, Melissa's voice again, but this time it trembled. "You have to understand, I didn't know. I didn't realize who he was. The cell doors clanged as officers rushed down the hall. Mine swung open. You out. They escorted me back to the room, but not with the same suspicion. Something had changed. Melissa sat at the table, her arms folded tight across her chest. The certainty from the day before was gone. In its place was confusion, maybe even guilt. She looked at me, then quickly away. They told me, her voice cracked, they told me you are not who I thought. Detective Rourke stood at the corner, arms crossed, watching us both like a hawk. Seems our friend here isn't just another name in the system. Care to explain, or should I? The room held its breath. I exhaled slowly. The mask I had worn for months began to slip, the truth clawing its way forward. And in that silence I knew the breaking point had arrived. The room was so quiet that I could hear the tick of the wall clock. Each second a drumbeat pushing me closer to a choice I couldn't avoid. My cover, my mission, my silence, they had carried me this far. But now Melissa sat across from me, her eyes heavy with confusion, fear, and something else creeping in. Regret. Detective Rourke leaned forward, the overhead light cutting shadows across his face. Enough games. Either you tell her or I will. I studied him. His voice carried no bluff. Somehow someone had cracked open a file, traced a line too carefully guarded, and discovered what I had sworn to keep hidden. My eyes flicked to Melissa. She sat rigid, clutching her own arms as though holding herself together. She whispered, almost to herself, I thought you were dangerous. I thought I was protecting people. The words stung because they weren't new. They were echoes of centuries of assumptions, a reflex that needed no evidence, just the shape of my skin, the weight of my silence, the frame I carried. Slowly, I straightened in my chair. The cuffs on my wrists clinked against the table. You want the truth? My voice filled the room, steady but edged with fire. Fine. Here it is. I pulled against the cuffs until the steel dug hard into my skin. Then with a sharp movement, I slid my hand just enough to reveal what I had kept hidden beneath my sleeve, the edge of a badge. The room froze. Melissa's eyes widened, her breath catching. Rourke's jaw tightened, though he didn't look surprised, more like satisfied that his suspicions had finally landed. I let the badge rest against the table, the polished metal catching the light like a blade. I am Detective Michael Harris, Federal Undercover Operations. I've been working this city for 8 months, building a case against a network you don't even know exists. Drug runners, weapons traffickers, people who think the law is theirs to bend. Every hour I've been here, every silence you mistook for guilt, it was me protecting that case, protecting lives. Melissa's lips parted, but no words came out. Her face drained of certainty. You think calling 911 made you a hero? My voice sharpened, though I kept it measured. You nearly burned a case that could dismantle half the pipeline feeding this city's streets. You nearly got men killed. And you know why? Because you saw me walking, and your first instinct wasn't to ask, wasn't to wonder, it was to fear. Her hands trembled against the table. I didn't know. I swear I didn't. You didn't want to know, I cut in. That's the problem. The words landed like a gavel. The silence after was heavier than chains. Even Rourke didn't move, his sharp eyes flicking between us, gauging the storm. Melissa's tears welled. I thought I was doing the right thing. I leaned closer, lowering my voice but letting every syllable pierce. Good intentions don't erase consequences. Look at me. Look at the men sitting in that cell. Every single one of them has been mistaken for something they're not, judged before they even speak. You say you wanted to protect people? Start by asking who you're protecting them from. Because sometimes, Melissa, I paused, letting the words cut slow. The danger isn't the man walking down the street. It's the fear inside the one watching. Her head dropped into her hands. Shoulders shook. For the first time, the wall of certainty she carried began to crack, revealing something raw underneath. Detective Rourke finally cleared his throat. You've made your point, Harris. But if you're done tearing her apart, maybe let's talk about how this doesn't end up in flames. I sat back, the fire still burning in me, but controlled now. I knew the case needed silence, but silence without truth was poison. And Melissa needed to hear it, not as punishment, but as a mirror. Rourke stepped forward, unlocking the cuffs with a metallic snap. My wrists were free, but the weight on my chest wasn't. Melissa looked up, her eyes red, her voice breaking. I didn't mean to hurt you. I believed what I was taught, to be careful, to assume the worst. I stood slowly, resting my hands on the table. And that's what has to change, not just for me, for everyone who looks like me, for everyone who lives under the shadow of assumptions. Justice isn't just about laws. It's about what we carry in our hearts before the law even shows up. The room breathed heavy with the truth of it. Melissa's face was a storm, shame, sorrow, realization crashing together. And then, for the first time since this all began, she whispered the only words that mattered. I'm sorry. Not polished, not perfect, but real. I nodded once, not to absolve her, but to mark the beginning of something different. The climax had come. The truth was out. But what came after, that would decide whether this day ended in redemption or another scar. Melissa's apology hung in the air like fragile glass, threatening to shatter if anyone moved too quickly. The room still carried the weight of accusation and revelation, but now something softer crept in, a shift so subtle it felt almost dangerous to acknowledge. I exhaled slowly, the kind of breath you hold in your chest for too long, waiting for the storm to pass. Sorry, I repeated, my voice quiet but firm. That word doesn't erase what happened today, but it can be the beginning of something, if you let it. Her fingers twisted together, knuckles pale. I don't even know how to make this right. That's the thing, I said, leaning against the table, my body finally loosening. It isn't about fixing it with me. It's about what you do tomorrow, who you choose to see differently, what you choose to question when fear whispers in your ear. Detective Rourke, who had been watching like a silent judge, finally stepped forward, his tone practical, but not without weight. We'll smooth this out, Harris. Officially, this never happened. The operation stays clean. Melissa, he looked at her with eyes that carried both authority and fatigue. You need to think long and hard about what your instincts cost today. The department doesn't take this lightly. She nodded quickly, her tears drying into streaks across her cheeks. She looked at me, her voice trembling. If I had known who you were, I never would have. I cut her off, softer this time. That's the lesson. You shouldn't need a badge to treat me as human. The silence after was heavier than anything before, because it was truth laid bare. Not anger, not accusation, just truth. Rourke uncuffed the final clasp and nodded toward the door. You're clear, Harris. Go home. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we reset. But as I stepped toward the door, I paused. Something inside me, maybe duty, maybe hope, wouldn't let me walk away without leaving more than a scar. I turned back. Melissa was still sitting, shoulders curved inward as though she were shrinking beneath the weight of the day. Melissa, I said gently, and she lifted her eyes to mine. Fear is a teacher. It whispers things that sound like truth, but they're lies. You have a choice now to keep listening to it or to start unlearning it. That choice will define more than just you. It'll define everyone around you. Her lips parted as though she wanted to say something, but nothing came. Instead, she nodded, and for the first time, her eyes didn't hold defensiveness. They held reflection. I walked out into the day, the air crisp and sharp, the city alive with distant sirens and headlights carving paths through the dark. My cover was still intact. My mission still alive. But something deeper had shifted, not in the case, but in the human story that ran parallel to it. On my drive home, I replayed the day, the call, the cuffs, the revelation, Melissa's breaking point, and I realized that while justice sometimes comes in courtrooms and verdicts, just as often it begins in moments like this, unseen, uncomfortable, transformative, because justice isn't just about punishing what's wrong, it's about changing what we believe is right. Weeks later, the operation closed. The traffickers were taken down, the pipeline severed. Headlines spoke of justice served, but what no headline captured was the quiet change that lingered in the air, the ripple effect of one woman forced to confront her own reflection. Months after that day, I ran into Melissa again, this time not in an interrogation room, but at a community event I was quietly monitoring. She approached me carefully, her presence humble, carrying the weight of someone who had been doing the hard work of change. She didn't try to explain or excuse. She didn't overcompensate with smiles. Instead, she simply said, "I'm trying every day. I see things differently now, people differently." I nodded. That's all any of us can do. Keep trying. And for the first time, there was no wall between us. Just two people, flawed, learning, human. As I left that day, I thought about the call she had made. A single phone call born of fear had nearly undone months of work, nearly destroyed lives. But it had also forced a confrontation, pulled a veil off a truth we often ignore, that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a knife, it's a perception. And the only way to disarm it is with truth, patience, and the courage to face our own shadows. That's what I carried with me as the city lights blurred past. Not bitterness, not triumph, but a quiet, steady conviction. Because maybe, just maybe, Melissa's fear had set the stage for something greater. A moment of reckoning, a reminder that beneath the uniforms, the badges, the judgments, and the fear, we're all just people. And it's how we choose to see each other that decides whether justice ever has a chance. So if you're listening to this story, remember this. The next time fear whispers in your ear, ask yourself, are you seeing danger or just a shadow of your own prejudice? And more importantly, what would you do differently if you knew the person in front of you carried a story you hadn't heard yet? The day Melissa called 911 on me didn't end with an arrest or a headline or even a perfect resolution. It ended with a lesson, one that I hope you carry too, because justice doesn't start in court. It starts in us. And sometimes all it takes to begin is one hard truth spoken out loud.